In 1988, Elder M. Russell Ballard said, "Addiction surrenders later freedom to choose. Through chemical means, one can literally become disconnected from his or her own will." He said this 26 years ago. In our day, we have all been touched by addiction. If we have not experienced directly the effects of addiction, we have certainly witnessed them in those of the lives of the people we love. I hope to extend this concept of will beyond our current understanding of addiction and apply it to all forms of bondage. In our most recent General Conference, Elder Quentin L. Cook said, "God intended that men and women would be free to make choices between good and evil. People can become enslaved or put themselves in bondage not only to harmful addictive substances, but to harmful addictive philosophies that detract from righteous living. Bondage, subjugation, addictions, and servitude come in many forms." Close quote. When we think about bondage, we often think of sin, and certainly sin can enslave. I would like to expand our thoughts about bondage, and as Elder Cook suggests, consider the other forms that bondage may take in our lives. What makes bondage so unbearable is that it makes us powerless. It limits our choices. We have all felt the hopelessness that can come when we feel bound or powerless to change something in our lives. For this discussion, we will define bondage as anything that makes us feel powerless. Bondage can come in one of two ways, either by our own choices, or just as often by things that we have absolutely no say in. As I share a list of examples, I invite you to consider the forms that bondage takes in your life. As we have said, addictions to drugs, alcohol, immorality, pornography, gambling, but there are also addictions to things not so inherently evil, like video gaming, shopping, eating, Pinterest, sports, the list could go on. Sin, weaknesses, lack of education or skill, busyness, obligations, depression, difficult or dysfunctional relationships, our upbringings, finances in the form of poverty, debt, or unemployment, illness, aging, loss or grief, and even our attitudes can enslave us. Attitudes like complacency or victimhood. In any of these, and perhaps others you have just now considered, can render us powerless. By this definition, we can see how everyone is at one time or another, in some form, for varying reasons, in bondage. So what are the typical solutions? We can deny, we can surrender, or we can get help. John chapter 8, verse 32 reads, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Freedom is the opposite of bondage. We must know, live, and tell the truth to be free. We can clearly see that denial is no way to deliverance. So we can surrender. We can surrender and give up and let hopelessness abound. This is the most devastating reaction to bondage, for it is here that the adversary can convince us that our choices do not matter, not one way or the other. We may say, "I can't pay my debts anyway, so what difference does it make if I accrue more?" Or, "I will never recover from this addiction, but at least it numbs my pain." This powerless state is the worst kind of bondage because it is disguised as freedom. It is false freedom to do whatever we want. It is insidious and destructive. So 3, we can get help. This requires a different kind of work and effort than we think. It is not a matter of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps or resolving to no longer be powerless in our lives. We must come to understand that deliverance is far more a matter of the Lord's efforts than our own. It is only by the redeeming power of our Savior Jesus Christ that we can regain true freedom. This is not to say that we will always be delivered from the circumstances of our bondage, but from the powerlessness. So what is the best solution? Clearly, it is to get help. The Addiction Recovery Program Manual, developed and made available through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, offers instruction for how to make the atonement of Jesus Christ a reality in our lives each day. This is the solution for deliverance. This is the help. This program can benefit anyone. The first 3 steps in the 12-step program have been summed up as, "I can't. He can, and I will let him." And this is a message that everyone can benefit from, that everyone can apply to their lives, to their own particular bondage. This is the starting point of deliverance. So how? What do we do? This is best answered by those who have experience with utilizing and developing the Addiction Recovery Program, or ARP, manual. So here's one small example of what they have to say. We could make a decision to open ourselves to Him and surrender our entire lives, past, present, and future, and our will about our lives to Him. A decision to allow God to recover and redeem us. Gradually, we allowed the Lord to demonstrate His healing power and the safety of following His way. Eventually, each of us realized that we not only had to give up our addictions, whatever it is that binds us, but we also had to turn our entire will and life over to God. As we did so, we found Him patient and accepting of our faltering efforts to surrender to Him in all things. This submission to the Lord is hard doctrine. It requires us to rededicate ourselves to His will at the start of each day, and sometimes every hour, and from moment to moment. As we are willing to do so, we find the grace or enabling power to do what we could not do for ourselves. Close quote. Romans 6:18. Being then made free from sin, ye became the servants of righteousness. This kind of servitude, in contrast to the types of bondage we've been discussing, brings freedom and empowerment here on earth and throughout the eternities. To be empowered is to live by the Spirit, to feel His love and be influenced by it. This is not a one-time experience, not something I achieve, but something that I engage in each day. The ARP manual helps me to know how. Engagement is the opposite of complacency. When we have stepped onto the road of complacency that so often leads to bondage, we can return to the path of deliverance by remembering, as the Scriptures so often admonish us to do. We must remember who we are, who God is, and we must remember those times in our lives when we have witnessed His power of deliverance. We can witness His power in the Scriptures, in the lives of those around us, and if we are humble enough to recognize it, certainly in our own lives as well. As we do, we can discover for ourselves what we are taught in the ARP manual. You can accept with serenity the current reality of your condition when you trust in God's ability to help you. You can accept with serenity that although you cannot control the choices and actions of others, you can decide how you will act in any situation you will face. You can decide with courage to trust your Father in heaven and act according to His will. You can turn your will and life over to His care. You can decide to do what He asks and to keep His commandments. You may not be able to change some things in your life, but you can change your willingness to trust God and to obey Him. Close quote. 2 Nephi 2:6. Wherefore redemption cometh in and through the Holy Messiah, for He is full of grace and truth. I have known that truth. I have felt His love, and I have been delivered and empowered. I testify of Him, and I am a witness of His power. I urge you to recognize your need for the deliverance that our Savior has to offer, and to go and discover for yourself how the ARP manual can help you access that saving power. You can most easily access the manual through lds.org under Resources and search Addiction Recovery Program Manual. I conclude with another reference from Elder Cook. We must always remember that we do not save ourselves. We are liberated by the love, grace, and atoning sacrifice of the Savior. If we are true to His light, follow His commandments, and rely on His merits, we will avoid spiritual, physical, and intellectual bondage, for He is mighty to save.